have you all here. Thanks for coming. It's a terrific day in Santa Cruz. Just got back from being in San Diego where it rained all the time. It's great. I want to thank our sponsors for the annual member lunch today. First of our lunch sponsors is Wells Fargo Bank and Sandy Easton. If you guys would all stand up for a second. And the Santa Cruz Metropolitan Transit District, Alex here, and kind of threw around. I want to do a quick summary of what's happened in Santa Cruz and with the Chamber. We're working on a compressed time frame, so this may seem like a train that's just slowing down to pick up the mail, so you'll have to be a little patient with it. In 2015, Santa Cruz did have significant economic expansion, as we're all aware. Every local industry sector has had growth. Jobs are up, unemployment's down. We've seen some interesting infrastructure investment. But it's not to suggest that that hasn't created its own sets of problems. We've exacerbated some obvious weaknesses in our economic environment. Housing, transportation, water have all been taxed, and we understand that the constraints are limiting us. The Chamber had a good year. The WASAC event was particularly pleasing. Mark Cassidy Miller was the Chamber's delegate to that process, and we certainly appreciate the work that they did, and particularly Mark's representation of our interests there. The city and county housing elements and some changes in planning process have all been encouraging. Our broadband plan, the investment both in the city and the county is quite powerful. We passed school parcel taxes, which badly needed. We're in the process as a chamber of doing some things to implement tiered dues, which have been a particular success this year. And for those who've been by our office, you'll notice that we've moved. We're no longer on the first floor of the MA office building. We're now on the fourth floor, which is a much better accommodating space for us personally. 2016, we will have significant policy issues. The implementation of WASAC is its own task, a massive task. We're rethinking land use regarding housing, particularly with the corridor studies. Hoping that the UCSC Genomics Institute has a launch of larger scale than it's currently operating at. The other big issues, of course, the 2016 election, majorities on both the board of supervisors and the city council, some funding propositions that will be before us, particularly regarding education, a transportation sales tax, and perhaps some public facilities investment. We also will look for the emergence of some housing and commercial projects, land development projects. In the shameless plug category, let me encourage you all to register your business to participate in the business fair March 16th, and if you can't participate as an exhibitor, we will expect you all at the gate to shake hands with your colleagues. I want to recognize the local electeds who are here today from the city of Santa Cruz, all from the city of Santa Cruz. Mayor Cynthia Matthews, where are you, Cynthia? She stepped out, well, just in time. Don Lane, there's Don, thanks Don. David Terrasas, council member David Terrasas, thank you. Word, David. 3 minutes. David, sorry. And council member Rochelle Leroy. As always, a difficult job. You sit through very many of those meetings. I'm not sure that you should receive battle pay, but that's an interesting place to go. We want to recognize our chamber board members. We had 2 members that needed to resign in 2015 who aren't here today. Angus Jaffe retired to Colorado. Doug Erickson didn't retire, he took a new job, which turned him into a commuter to Asia and Europe, which made participating more difficult, as international as we like to think of ourselves. And Laurel Jones switched chambers in the middle of the year, as we had agreed. She transferred her efforts from ours to the Paro Valley Chamber. Laurel, where are you?
I'm right here.
What are you? You're not supposed to.
That's where I belong.
Right. Thank you. And I want one special recognition. Donna Blitzer is the UCSC Director of Government Affairs. She served on the Chamber Board for 8 years, including her term as a board chair in 2013. She completed her last drop of service at the end of the year last year. Donna, would you stand? And taking her spot, not her role, is Chris Mafia, Vice President of Regional Relationship Management for the Santa Cruz County Bank, and the chair of the 2016 Board of Directors. Chris, would you?
Thank you, Bill, and welcome everybody today. Thank you for attending. What a wonderful turnout we have today. So, it's going to be my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Chamber's Board of Directors. The Chamber's board members are remarkable for their dedication to the organization. It is an uncommonly collegial board and one whose energy and vision continues to drive the Chamber's success and growth. So now, I get to introduce the 2016 Board of Directors. As Chamber members, you can be proud of the work they do as your representatives and advocates for our business community. First, I'm going to introduce you to the Executive Committee, and when I read your name, please step forward, and for the sake of maintaining our tight time frame today, please hold your applause until all board members have been introduced. First Vice President Carl Rice, Seaside Company. VP, they don't listen very well, do they?
All cheer for me.
VP Membership and Communications, Amy Ivy, Bay Federal Credit Union. VP Community Affairs, Virginia Johnson, Office of County Supervisor, Cruz McPherson. The Executive Committee is rounded out by the two immediate past chairs of the board. Kirsty Scott, Scott Design, last year's board chair. Eric Summers, America Bank. And I think everybody's here, but Stephen Gray, yes, Vice President of Finance, Stephen Gray, Center of Maternity and Surgery. Now I'll introduce the rest of the members of the board. And if each one of you would come forward when I call your name. Returning board members, Hillary Bryant, Calliope Waterworks and former mayor. Mark Mississippi Miller, recently retired from Mississippi Miller Engineering. Tina Shull, Assistant City Manager. Mary Gourlay, Barry Swenson Builder. Greg Lucchina, David Link Real Estate. Stephanie Munoz, BTF Enterprises. Jim Murray, Dignity Hospital. Thomas Wynn, founder and principal of Wynn Financial Services. And then we have 7 new board members. So please join us when I introduce you. Sarah Latham, UCSC, Vice Chancellor of Business. Gary Merrill, owner of Emergent Systems. Monica Martinez, CEO, Encompass Services. Alan Smith, the Grunsky Law Offices. David Caracas, the Brereton Law Firm, and a member of the Santa Cruz City Council. And then not able to be with us is our new board member, Rich Picard, General Counsel for Plantronics. Also serving on the board as ex-officio members, Doug Fisher, who has served on the board in at least 3 decades and currently directs the Chamber of Ambassadors Board. We couldn't do anything without you, Doug. Bill Teisling, who served on the board throughout the 1990s and has been the Chamber's executive since 2007. So now, a round of applause for everyone. Please excuse us for a few minutes.
You'll just step this way,
Oh.
not this row right here.
We're going to be taking a picture, so you can take
All
it.
everyone fallen person, gravitate to right. Chambers around the world depend upon volunteers for most of the intellectual and physical labor that we must undertake. At the annual meeting, thank you, appreciate it. At the annual meeting, we customarily describe each of these committees and ask each volunteer group to stand to compress time today to meet our schedule. We're going to just ask you to look at the names of the individuals that begin on page 5 of the annual report, all of the volunteers. I'm going to briefly summarize the committees, and then I'm going to ask everyone who's participated on one of those committees, and again the board, to stand for a moment. The Members Management Committee, this is the business management of the Chamber, a Finance Committee, the Membership Committee, a Communications Committee, and its Community Affairs Committee, as well as the Executive Group. Chamber Events Committees include the Women in Business, the Women's Leadership Forum, the Business Fair, the Annual Recognition Dinner, and the Community Leadership Business. The Economic Development Council is also a committee that's shared with the City of Santa Cruz, and we would ask everyone who is present that has served on one of those committees to please stand and be recognized with a round of applause. Please stand, please. The Chamber Ambassadors was a long-time fixture in the Chamber administration, not only this Chamber, but the chambers around the country. About the time of the earthquake and the subsequent national recession, the Ambassadors Group was sort of erased from our efforts. It was rekindled 4 years ago through the work of Duff Fisher, a former ambassador, a former board member, and a former chairman of the board. Duff is the Chamber's ambassador-in-chief. He's going to recognize the work of this group. Please come up, Duff.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill, very much. I've got 2 minutes, so bear with me. We're going to rock and roll. The Chamber ambassadors are the front and the face of the Chamber, and it gives me a great deal of honor and pleasure to be involved with such a group of so dedicated and giving individuals that pretty much represent the Chamber at all our events. And the reason today is that I will announce the first ever James C. Thompson Ambassador of the Year Award. Jim Thompson is a local attorney, a friend of mine for 40 years, and generally an incredibly giving gentleman who very seldom or ever puts his name on anything that he does. And he supports numerous organizations in the community and in the county. I've chosen to include Jim's name in this because his involvement as a past chairman of the board and a member of the board of this community, and his amazingly generous offer to establish a trust fund, in reality in perpetuity, to maintain this award for the Chambers, way beyond any of my involvement or his. So I thank him personally, and the winner today of the James C. Thompson Ambassador Year Award is Mark Morano. Now, unfortunately, Mark's not here today, but as I'm speaking, he's in Houston, Texas, receiving an award from his company for excellence. So congratulations, Mark. The award is based on a number of points. We have a point system. So Mark went beyond the call of duty. There's a financial award that goes with that, so we will present that to Mark. Also, a little different, there'll be two people. I'd like Sarah Horsley to stand. Sarah, where are you? Right, Sarah. Sarah was number 2, and I want to recognize her. Thank you for all your efforts. And Michelle Bassey, if you would stand, please, in the back. Ambassador Michelle was number 3. This group is an incredibly dedicated group, and I'm just totally pleased that I'm able to be involved in this group.
And we're quite sure that there are a lot of you in the room that would love to join us on the Ambassador Committee. So, Patty and Jewel, could you raise your hand, please? If anybody is interested in joining our committee ambassadors, you'll notice with all of our little green tags on, please give Patty your business card or stop by and give a business card to Duff or give one to me, and we'll be in contact. So thank you, Duff, very much, and congratulations to our winners. So, for more than a century and a quarter, local businesses and organizations in the Santa Cruz area economic community have joined together as a Chamber of Commerce to create and sustain the jobs, businesses, local service providers, and capital investments that form that economic community. Without the financial support of these members and contributors, the work of the Chamber would not be possible. Today we thank all of our members and want to recognize those businesses who have made the most significant financial contributions through their participation in Chamber events and projects and projects their sponsorship. We didn't change that part of the script, but that's okay. So first, you have hopefully you were able to pick up the little handout up front because I'm not going to name them all individually. Our bronze partners. These names are listed on the back of the program and have contributed between $1,000 and $2,000 to the Chamber. Please, a round of applause for our bronze sponsors. on the back page have contributed between $2,000 and $5,000 to the Chamber, its events and projects. Please recognize our silver sponsors. The Chamber's gold partners, the University of California, Santa Cruz, and Wells Fargo Bank, invested between $10,000 and $20,000 in the Chamber and its programs. Would you please stand to be recognized? Finally, each of the Chamber's Platinum partners have invested more than $20,000 in the Chamber. With the following, please stand to be recognized. Dignity Health Dominican Hospital, Dignity Health Medical Group, Physicians Medical Group of Santa Cruz, and the City of Santa Cruz. So thank you to all of you and to everyone in the room as well. Finally, we would like to recognize our long-term members celebrating milestone anniversaries this year. The names of members with anniversary dates ending in a 1 or a 6 have certificates displayed at the back, I think they're at the back of the room, and have been projected in rotation on the screen. Please express your thanks to the Seaside Company, a member for the last 90 years. And the George H. Wilson Company, a member for the past 95 years. Thank you, everyone.
I'm pleased to have the opportunity to introduce our two table sponsors, who are going to introduce both our inquisitors and our two candidates for Congress. First, I'm going to introduce Santa Cruz Metropolitan Transit Agency Director Alex Clifford, and he's going to introduce to you Sandy Eason, the President of Business Banking for the Wells Fargo Bank.
Thank you, Bill. So Santa Cruz Metro is pleased to be a sponsor of the Chamber Lunch. Just a little bit about Santa Cruz Metro. Santa Cruz Metro provides 5.5 million trips annually on a fixed route and Highway 17 commuter service, and 100,000 trips annually on our paratransit service called Cruz. Our service area population is 250,000. 46% of our annual riders are UCSC students and faculty. Our operating budget is $50 million a year, and we employ 325 employees. Now, interesting to note, 88% of our employees reside in Santa Cruz County, so our employees' wages turn over and are reinvested in Santa Cruz County in housing, goods, and services. We are a major economic mobility, positive air quality asset to Santa Cruz County. Now, as you've probably seen in the media, we're having some financial challenges that we're working through. We're undergoing a major comprehensive operational analysis. At your table is a card that welcomes you to go to our website and to learn a little bit more about what's going on with Metro, what our challenges are, and how we propose to resolve those. So please take time to visit our website. So we're particularly pleased to be a part of this presentation of two candidates for the 20th Congressional District, seat being vacated by Sam Farr. Sam Farr has been a great friend to transportation and to Santa Cruz Metro. He will be missed. My brief role is to explain to you the process we will use today. The candidates will alternately describe their views of what our community and planning regions should expect from our federal government in 4 areas: transportation, housing, education, workforce preparation, and economic environment. After 4 minutes of presentation by each, we have asked experts in each area to ask 1 or 2 clarifying or expanding questions of the candidate. I'd like to introduce those inquisitors, if you will. For economic vitality, Santa Cruz Palo Alto Medical Foundation and Sutter Maternity and Surgery Center President, Dr. Larry D. Gitaldi. Larry, please stand. Regional Transportation Commission, Executive Director George Nundero. For Housing, John Stewart Company President Mary Custon. Mary. And finally, for Education, Cabrillo College President Laurel Jones. It is also a privilege to introduce Sandy Eason, Wells Fargo Bank's Regional Vice President of Business Banking. Sandy Eason.
Good afternoon, Santa Cruz. Wow, welcome sunshine. Bless the rain, right? But welcome the sunshine. It's great to see. Really pleased that Wells Fargo, we continue to be, as we have for decades, centuries, to be enthusiastic supporters of the Chamber, and especially functions like this that bring our local business community to political decision makers. It's my pleasure to introduce both Casey and Jimmy. And a quick little tidbit before I do a quick bio on them. Casey's from Pacific Grove, and I'm an alma mater of Pacific Grove High School. And Pacific Grove and Carmel High, for those of you that might know, are huge rivals. Huge rivals. So I'm a breaker, and I graduated from Pacific Grove High School 42 years ago. I'll let you do the math. And Jimmy immediately pointed out to me that I was wearing Carmel colors today. So there's a little bit of competition going on there at Carmel PG. So it's just a fun little tidbit. But so it's my honor to introduce, first of all, Casey Lucius. She served as Professor of National Security Decision Making at the U.S. Naval War College prior to resigning last year in order to run for the U.S. House of Representatives. She has taught U.S. foreign policy and Asian studies at the Naval Postgraduate School, on U.S.-Vietnam relations, and at the Hanoi University of International Studies. Casey was the operations assistant to the ambassador at the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi and spent nearly a decade in service as a naval intelligence officer. She earned her PhD in political science from the University of Hawaii. She's conducted research in China and Vietnam and has published a book on Vietnam's political system. She currently serves on the Pacific Grove City Council as well as several regional boards. She's married and has a 6-year-old son. Jimmy Panetta is an attorney for the Monterey County District Attorney's Office, where he prosecutes murder and other serious felony cases. Previously with the Alameda County District Attorney's Office in Oakland, he also served as an appellate attorney for the California Attorney General. Jimmy received his law degree from Santa Clara University and an undergraduate degree in international relations from UC Davis. He worked on missile and chemical weapons, non-proliferation issues for the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C., and at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. A commissioned officer with the United States Navy Reserve, he was mobilized to active duty in 2007 with a Special Operations Task Force and deployed to Afghanistan. He was awarded a Bronze Star for his service for Special Forces team. With that, I'm going to pause and give him a hand. Thank you. On a number of board of directors and committees in the Monterey Bay area. He and his wife, Carrie, have 2 daughters. Welcome to both of you. Thank you.
And in an effort to make this as efficient as we can, Casey, if you would just start at the podium, we'll begin with economic vitality. If you would like to start a 4-minute conversation of your own about economic vitality. Thanks.
Definitely. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having us here today. I think this is going to be a great discussion and a great way for us to share our views on these 4 important topics. So on economic vitality, when I have talked to the directors of various chambers in this area, I hear the same challenge, which is we have an unprepared and uneducated workforce to meet our local industry needs. And part of that speaks to the needs in education, which we'll also speak to. but it also provides opportunities for job training. And there is an important area where we can cultivate a professional and reliable workforce, and that's with our veterans. You have already heard that Jimmy and I are both veterans, but we have 2 million veterans in the state of California. We have 35,000 right here in this district. There used to be a federal program called the Veterans Retraining Assistance Program. It is no longer funded, but this is the kind of program that your representative could initiate to get reinstated to make sure that we have a properly trained workforce to meet the local industry needs. And for Santa Cruz County, those local industries are agriculture, education, healthcare, and hospitality. Specifically in regard to hospitality and leisure, we want to be working with the state and federal government to make the most of state and federal lands for recreation. We can also use ecotourism and alternative energies as job-producing sectors right here in this county. And what the state and federal government can be doing is they can be upgrading and building upon our power grid to make sure that infrastructure is ready, so that when private industry does invest in alternative energy technology, the public sector is ready to receive that new technology and able to allow us to use it to save money and to be more energy efficient. So we keep hearing that the economy is improving and unemployment rates are down, but we know that many people are still underemployed. And part of the reason for this is because there are so many federal regulations that make it difficult for employers to hire and maintain full-time employees. I was a waitress in high school and in college, and then my senior year of college, I worked at the National Association of Manufacturers in Washington, D.C. That was 20 years ago. But last year, the National Association of Manufacturers published a report called The Cost of Federal Regulation. And they looked at all different sectors, and they looked at different sizes of businesses. So even businesses with fewer than 20 employees, what they found and what this report shows is that most employers have to divert money from employee initiatives to regulatory compliance. And right now, there's actually a bill in committee in the House of Representatives. It's called the Small Business Sunset Regulatory Act. And it looks at the economic impact of government regulations. This is the kind of bill, as your representative, that I would support. But ultimately, we want to create an environment in which small businesses can succeed, whether that be through tax relief or simply offering flexibility, making sure that employers can determine the right hours, the right benefits for their employees and for their businesses. Ultimately, we need to relieve some of the burdens on small businesses. And I have 30 seconds. So, as I wrap up here, I think it's important to note, Bill's very strict about this, I think it's important to note that when we talk about this topic of economic growth and economic vitality, we often talk about this at a very high level. And we talk about regulatory compliance and tax codes. But if we get down to basics, if we think about how people make their best contributions to society, it's when they have a job and when they have a roof over their head. And I believe that generally people want the same thing. They want to have a job. They want to be able to provide for their family. They want to be treated fairly. And employers want the same thing. So we have to be careful to not pit these two groups against each other, but to see them as mutually supportive and make sure that as policymakers, we're establishing policies to make sure that both groups succeed.
Yeah, Casey, thanks. Welcome to Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz County is now the second least affordable county in the U.S. after Maui, in which to live. And as an employer in healthcare, we can't even recruit highly trained nurses and physicians. But the other side of the economic world are undocumented folks. And whatever our future is at, it's going to be important. What's your policy on immigration reform, and how could you support the ag side of our economy?
Yes, I'm glad you asked, and this is a very important topic I wish we had more time to talk about. But when you talk about immigration, especially undocumented workers, and in particular for the ag industry relies on the H-2A visas as a guest worker program. And what I hear from leaders in the ag industry is that that's a very cumbersome program. There are 5 federal agencies that are responsible for issuing the H-2A visas. I think one way to reform that would be to put those under the responsibility of the Department of Labor. So you make out a labor issue rather than an immigration issue. The other thing is employers charge for the H-2A visas, and then there are all kinds of other requirements about you have to provide transportation, and you have to provide housing, etc. So one thing would be to make these visas less cumbersome for the employers to actually get. And just to give you an example, nationwide, the ag industry needs about 3.2 million H-2A visas, and 140,000 are issued every year. So there's a huge gap, which is why you have so many undocumented workers. The best way to deal with immigration is to make sure that people who are working here are able to work here and live here legally, and that has to be done through visa reform. Thank you.
I was going to ask this, Jamie. The minimum wage, Oregon now has 2 levels. Portland has a higher minimum wage than the rest of Oregon. Given the fact that affordability and ability to recruit folks, what's your position on the minimum wage, and should it be higher in high-cost areas like Santa Cruz and San Francisco?
So generally, I think minimum wage should be determined by the municipality. And so far, that's been the case in California. I just read this morning that there is a large private sector union pushing for $15 minimum wage throughout the state of California. And the proposal is to start it in 2017 and make it go through 2020 and raise it $1 a year so that by 2020 it's up to $15 an hour. And I actually think that's a great approach, rather than jumping to $15 an hour, having this phased approach over 5 years.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. Thank you to the Santa Cruz Chamber of Commerce, and congratulations to the new board members as well. Thank you, Casey, for doing this with all of us. Look, I know, growing up here, I know Santa Cruz is unique. And what makes Santa Cruz unique when it comes to its economy is its small businesses. When you start out at River Street, go down Pacific Street, and you end up on Beach Street, for the most part, all you see is small businesses, from Plantronics to Pacific Cookie Company to the boardwalk itself. It's about family-owned businesses who started here, who stay here, and who live here. And they represent the uniqueness, the resilience, and the continuance of what this community stands for, and all of the values. And so that's why, as a federal representative, you have to continue to ensure that businesses like yours, like you see here in Santa Cruz, throughout the streets, are protected, and that people are given the opportunity to start their small businesses, with small business loans and venture capital programs. Now, what you also realize, though, is that Santa Cruz County, the largest producer, the largest income earner, an economic driver, though, is agriculture, bringing in $1.5 billion to the economy a year and bringing over 11,000 jobs to the area. That's why, as a federal representative, my first priority is immigration reform. There has to be comprehensive immigration reform brought to the table. It's unfortunate that it's not happening now. It's unfortunate that it won't happen during this president's administration. But hopefully in 2017, Republican leadership will be ready to bring it forward. And I look forward to working a part of that. Making sure there's a legal path to citizenship, making sure that the H-2A visa process is reformed, because it is complex, there's no doubt about that. And you make sure that basically everybody has the opportunity to come here, follow the laws, and make sure that they come here and have the opportunities just like my grandfather did. And at the same time, yes, we have to take up border security. That's for sure. It's a comprehensive reform, and that's what needs to be done. Now, tourism is a second driver. We understand that. We are here because of what we see out there through those windows. It's the environment that's important to us. We make sure to protect it, and we're glad that we have the federal government to help us manage it. We have a national park out there with the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. We have our national parks in our backyard with the Pinnacles, with the Four-Door National Monument. We have those resources. We have the environment that we love, that we share, that makes this the best place on earth. There's no doubt about that. But as I was speaking to someone about this earlier, he said, look, we love this place. This is the best place on earth. But it is so hard to live here. And that deals with having important jobs here. It deals with having housing here, which we'll continue to discuss. And we also have to recognize the higher education facilities that we have here. We are so lucky that we have the University of California, Santa Cruz. And I'm so lucky to be a trustee on their foundation, making it known, raising money for that school. Because what you realize is that they have certain institutions that contribute to our economy. The Genomics Institute with David Hauslow, the Marine Sciences with Gary Griggs, the Nanotechnology Institute, as well as the Astronomy Institute. Now, these are important parts of our community. Now, I just met with a bunch of small business owners today, and one thing that they were talking about was that they were getting hammered when it came to implementing the Affordable Care Act. We get that. The Affordable Care Act is not perfect, but I also had them go around the room and I asked them to raise their hands. How many of you are for universal health care? And every single person raised their hands. But you have to realize, though, that they are continuing to fix it. It's not perfect, but it's going to get fixed. And that's what they've been doing since 2010, and they'll continue to do that. And as a federal representative, I will be here to listen to you, to listen to your concerns, and make those changes where necessary. Thank you.
So Jim, we sit between two worlds, the ag world of your county and Santa Clara County with its incredible innovations. Public-private partnerships. The Chamber went to San Luis Obispo a couple years ago and saw, I think, best practice in the relationship between their four-year institution and innovation and entrepreneurs in San Luis Obispo County. How can the federal government support and enhance the relationships between our economy and the four-year schools and even the community colleges in our area? How can you support public-private partnerships to advance the economy in Santa Cruz?
Well, look, it's unfortunate because what we're stuck with, okay? The UC system is consistently ranked #1 in the country as to its education system. And we're lucky that we have UCSC right here. We're lucky that we have another renowned university on the other side of the bay with CSUMB, Monterey. But the fact is that there's been a divestment in our education system, okay? And what needs to happen is that basically tuition needs to be lowered. Because it's been, over the last 30 years, tuition has been raised 300%, okay? Kids are going to college, but unfortunately, we're setting them up for failure when they graduate from college. Kids have $1.2 trillion in loans at this point, $1.2 trillion. And you know what else they have? There's 8 million students who are in default on those loans. So they go to school, they take student loans, and they get out there, and they're prevented from doing things that they want to do, like serve, like start small businesses, because they have to pay back these loans. So I think the government, in order to encourage students to, one, go to college, but two, take the chance after college. There needs to be the reduction in tuition and the reduction in student loans, and you can do that through a number of ways, including expanding AmeriCorps, having a National Service Act, where basically people can go to school, can then serve, and take a deduction on their loans, a deduction on their tuition to serve. And this way they can give back to the country and their communities, as I know many people would like to do.
And if we could go on then to transportation.
Sure.
If you just begin your 4 minutes of conversation on transportation.
Of course. Look, once again, with infrastructure as well, there's been a divestment in our infrastructure. There's no doubt about that. And what that can lead to is less jobs, less workers, more traffic, and more potholes. The reason that there's been this disinvestment is because of all the dysfunction that's going on in Washington, D.C. You talk to the people in the transportation industry, and they will tell you that the funding from the state, the funding from the feds, is basically non-existent. It's there, but it's just not enough. And so what does that leave us with? That leaves us to you, the locals, having to basically deal with a half-cent sales tax coming up in November for you. But you know what? It's understandable. You need to be that self-help economy. You need to be that self-help county to make sure that you get that money. Half-cent sales tax that's going to go to paratransit, that's going to add 3 auxiliary lanes to Highway 1, that's going to basically go to upkeep and maintenance of our roads and infrastructure as well as the rail track. But what's most important is that you can use that money to leverage the federal money that's going to be coming in because of the FAST Act, the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act that was passed just this December in 2015. $305 million for the next 5 years. That's it though. That's all you're looking at. $305 billion, excuse me, for the next 5 years. That's what you're looking at. Are you going to see some of that? Hopefully. But when you have that money that you can leverage, you can hopefully use it. And so with the transportation, you have to realize that it's unfortunate that there's been such a divestment, but you also have to realize that you can't rely solely on the government funding. There has to be it has to be local, but there also has to be other funding mechanisms that come into play. Ideas, yes, you can raise the gas tax, but with fuel efficiency cars, with cars being driven not as much as they used to, is that something that's going to work? And when you think about it, you could maybe go to a vehicle miles traveled fee, or you could sit there and some people might not like this, but the fact is, maybe you bring back earmarks. Everybody I talk to about earmarks, including our representatives, say they were a good thing. They brought in money to this area. They continue to bring in projects to this area. Sam Farr was there. He made sure to bring in money to this area for those types of issues. And as a representative of this area, that's going to be my responsibility, to make sure, one, that we leverage the money that you have for the federal money so it comes in there, and two, to bring the necessary projects so that our families can be here in this area, here stuck at work, and not stuck in their car as I was for 2 hours this morning driving up here from Monterey. That's what it's about. We need to keep our workers here. We can't have them commute here. It's just not going to work. So as your federal representative, I will be sure to bring in as much as I can when it comes to the funding here to help our infrastructure, help our commute, and lessen the burden on the people who work, the people who live here.
Thank you, Jimmy. So when you talk about leveraging federal dollars, one of the trends that we've seen that's been disturbing over the past 10 years or so, not just withdrawal of federal support, but also specifically withdrawal of support for public transportation. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you might see as priorities in that arena? We know that this county, we're running out of room for more cars. Even if we do improve the highway, we could have a more robust public transportation system if we had the money to invest in it. If we pass the tax measure, we could leverage those dollars. So maybe talk about what you would see happening at the federal level to maybe reverse that.
Well, you know, look, it's like I said, we're going to get funding, okay? The FAST Act was passed, there's funding that's there. But is it enough? Is it enough for the projects? I mean, you look at the rail, the idea of the rail, and what the cost was millions, way more than any gas tax that could provide for it, way more than the measure a half-cent sales tax could provide. So there has to be new funding mechanisms that come up. And we're going to be relying on people like you, Mr. Tondero, to basically listen to you and hopefully get your ideas as to what funding mechanisms the people in Washington, D.C. can use to ensure that our infrastructure is maintained and upkept, and as well as when it comes down to public transportation. Look, I remember growing up, and I remember the discussions about having a rail up over the mountains into Silicon Valley. And unfortunately, we gave that up. That's no longer an option at this point. And so it's something that the locals need to decide whether or not They want that type of commute system, energy efficient, electrical type of rail system here in this district. It's going to be up to the locals here. And if that decision is made, then I'll be sure to support it because it's a decision of you. And that comes down to the funding that we need for buses and other public transportation. So that's the important thing, is that to make sure that, yes, you have money, that we can leverage it and show the states and the feds, bring it, show us the money when it comes to that.
Very good. So looking forward, one of the things that has caused gridlock in Washington is basically partisanship over any issue. And transportation was traditionally nonpartisan. So can you briefly say, do you see hope for that change?
Look, you know, you get into this game, you got to be an optimist, okay? I'm optimistic that Congress can work together. I see that. I see that with the newer generation that's coming into Congress, that's bringing the collaborative spirit. Because, frankly, I guarantee you, they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed by the reputation of Washington, D.C. When you have a House Speaker that says that his job is not to create laws, but to repeal laws, I think that goes to the efforts to show that they basically want to take Congress out of the equation. We're there to put Congress back into the equation. That's what our job is. We need to make sure that Congress is a part of this democracy. I've seen it work. I was back there, and there was an editorial brief. There was an editorial by Tom Daschle and Trent Lott a few weeks ago, and he talked about 4 things that are necessary: vision, leadership, chemistry, and compromise. We need that personal chemistry back in the game plan. We need that personal chemistry, and that will lead us to that professional compromise. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to work across all sides in order to develop that chemistry and develop that compromise, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. On the topic of transportation, on the face of it, although I might not want to say this given the audience, but on the face of it, transportation can be a boring topic until you think about the impact on our way of life, sitting in traffic for 2 hours, the impact on the local economy, the impact on the global supply chain. If you look around this room, everything in this room, this podium, the chairs that you're sitting on, everything was either on a ship or a truck to get here. So there is the impact on our global economy and our global security and stability. But even on the local economy, if you have tourists who are sitting in traffic for 2 hours trying to get into Santa Cruz on a Friday night or a Saturday to spend their weekend here, that can mean the difference between a successful weekend for a local restaurant or a local hotel or a financially damaging weekend. So the challenge that exists in this region, as we've talked about, one is congestion, another is the quality of our road infrastructure. A third challenge is federal funding. And as you know, federal funding has declined. It has also become unreliable. In 2016, there was only $3 million in both state and federal funding for new projects in Santa Cruz County. So one of the obvious goals is how do we improve our road infrastructure in such a way that it also addresses the problem of congestion? And how do we get federal funding to initiate these projects? In my mind, we're not just talking about filling potholes, but we're talking about widening our major goods corridors and moving people to mass transit. And the more that we can move people to mass transit, the more it frees up our highways to transport goods, especially the agricultural goods that are moving from this Tri-County region across the entire country. So Jimmy mentioned the FAST Act, and this is actually good news. First of all, it was passed with bipartisan support, and it is a 5-year transportation bill. It provides federal funding for transportation projects. It increases that funding by 11% over 5 years, and it also streamlines the approval process for new projects. Now, candidates are always saying, I'm going to streamline this and I'm going to streamline that. But when it comes to transportation, there are 60 federal agencies and 30 congressional committees involved in the development of transportation policy. So any legislation that can get some of those committees or get some of those agencies out of the way will not only speed things up, but it will definitely save money. Another important issue when it comes to transportation, and I think a broader issue, is what is our national transportation policy? Yes, we need to address congestion. Yes, we need to have quality road improvements. But we also need to have a comprehensive national transportation policy that has a vision for the future. A vision for the future sounds too broad, so let me be more specific. It also has to include key goals about revenue and spending. Let me give you an example. The Highway Trust Fund. The Highway Trust Fund is a pot of money that has become a target for various transit projects that need to be funding. They can dip into the Highway Trust Fund to pay for transit projects, even if they're not highway projects. And there are other pots of money within transportation that this happens to. So because transportation is so important to our local economy, to our national economy, and to our quality of life, I propose 3 things. First, we advocate for long-term planning. The FAST Act is a 5-year bill. I would say we need to be passing transportation bills that are 10 to 15 years in length. And we need to get federal funding to this district. Second, we need to protect those pots of money, especially the Highway Trust Fund. And third, we need to reform the number of agencies that are involved in developing national transportation policy. Thank you.
So Casey, thank you for that. So you mentioned that transit projects, public transportation projects, are often funded from the Highway Trust Fund. That's kind of a long-standing deal, and there's a lot of tension between those two. So maybe the logical question then is, how should we fund public transportation if it doesn't come from the Highway Trust Fund? Where would they come from? The general fund, or how would you fund that?
Yes, so good question. I got a very important education before lunch started by some of your colleagues who talked to me about bus on the shoulder, bus on the shoulder. And this is an interesting concept. And I said to them, okay, so this is the idea. We want more people to take public transportation, and do we have the space for that? So using using the shoulders is a great way to do that. But obviously, first of all, who approves that? I thought maybe it was the county. They say no, it's Caltrans. Second is who funds it? Probably Caltrans in that case, which means the money comes from the state. But third is, how much money does that really cost? And are the current shoulders sufficient to initiate a project like Bus on the Shoulders? And the answer I got was, well, we don't know. We need to do a feasibility study. And Jimmy mentioned high-speed rail and the billions of dollars that have been spent on that. So to your question is, well, where should we get the funding? And as I mentioned, and as you know, there are all these different pots of money for transportation. But unfortunately, regardless of what pot it comes out of, there is so much money spent on studies and reports. And I know those things are important, but it also seems to me like starting with reform, starting with the right policies, and getting some of those agencies out of the way so that we can streamline the approval process, the permitting process, and we're not spending so much money on reports and feasibility studies, frees up money to spend it on the projects that we really need at the local level, like a bus on the shoulder. I'll leave it at that. I don't know how much time I have. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To Mary. And Casey, would you talk a little bit about housing?
Yes. Housing is an issue. It's a topic that I feel very passionate about because I grew up living in apartments. My family lived paycheck to paycheck, and every time the rent was raised, we moved to a new apartment building, and sometimes that meant moving to a new school district. So I definitely understand and appreciate the need for affordable housing. And in fact, I never lived in a house. I always lived in an apartment until my husband and I moved to Pacific Grove. And even then, we were only able to buy a house because of the declining economy and the housing bubble. But for us, it was really a matter of timing and good luck. But it shouldn't be a matter of timing and good luck for people to be able to buy a home and experience the American dream. I mean, I'm grateful that we could experience the pride of home ownership, and we know what that feels like to buy your first home. But there's something even more about home ownership than just buying your first home and having that experience of the American dream. When you own your home, you become a stakeholder in your community. When you own your home, you have a different level of concern about what happens in your neighborhood, what happens on your street, about zoning, about the quality of schools in your neighborhood. And just to give you an example about becoming a stakeholder, when we first bought our house, we had a kind of a weird, dangerous intersection 1 block behind our house. So I joined the Traffic Safety Commission. And there were parents in the neighborhood who were very concerned about speeding cars and concerned about kids playing outside. So then that led me to running for the city council so that I could be the voice for those parents, because I too had a young child who was playing outside. So what I'm trying to say is when we talk about housing, we often think about this as affordable housing and we need more federal funding for affordable housing, and that's true. But I think a parallel path should be establishing policies that promotes home ownership. Right now in Santa Cruz County, 60% of residents own their homes. That's below the national average. The national average is 64%. So wouldn't it be great if in Santa Cruz County we could get that number to exceed the national average? Wouldn't it be great if we could get 70% home ownership in Santa Cruz County? And the way to do that is to establish policies that promote home ownership. But we have to make sure we don't make some of the same mistakes that were made with policies in the past that promoted home ownership and ended up getting people in over their heads and defaulting on their home mortgages. One of the ways that we can promote home ownership in a responsible way and make sure that people succeed is through a federal, state, and local partnership where federal legislation encourages state and local governments to establish housing trust funds. And those housing trust funds could be specifically for home ownership purposes. So the federal policies could encourage state and local governments to do things like waive the developer fees, especially if a home is being bought in a particular neighborhood or being purchased by an underserved population. In addition to the home ownership programs, we also need to be protecting senior housing, and we need to be protecting funding for transitional housing, especially transitional housing for our veteran community and for our homeless community. And then finally, we need to address the constraints associated with developing affordable housing, whether that is for renters or buyers. And some of those constraints include high developer fees, the constraints on water usage, density regulations, and of course, federal funding. And federal funding is a key theme that you'll hear in all 4 of these topic areas. And federal funding is always inconsistent, which is why I suggest instead of looking to funding, we look to develop the right policies. And in terms of housing, the right policies are those that empower the states and the municipalities to design programs that meet the needs of their residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Casey. I agree that homeownership is very important. Let's focus for a few minutes on a whole other category, and that there's several of them. Those who are homeless, you've mentioned veterans housing, but I'll talk more about that. Special needs housing, low-income housing, and workforce housing. The social cost of inadequate affordable housing is tremendous, as you know. Where would you put your priorities in terms of those groups, and how would you look for resources? Okay,
so let me start with workforce housing. I mentioned H-2A visa reforms, and right now the H-2A visa requires that employers provide housing. That works in some cases, but what happens is you have a federal mandate for workforce housing, but then you have local zoning restrictions that often prevent employers from building the required housing. One of the reforms that could be done in the H-2A visas would be that employers could provide a housing allowance instead of having to provide housing. And then that allows the workers to go out and find housing or have shared housing, etc. I think that's an important priority, and that's a remedy that we should be able to implement quickly and hopefully easily. On the issue of homeless housing and also veteran housing, but in particular for homeless housing, I serve on the Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board. And at the former Fort Ord, there is the Veterans Transition Center. The Veterans Transition Center provides transitional housing for homeless veterans. And they use HUD funding, federal funding, to pay for that. Well, recently that HUD funding went away because the federal government decided that transitional housing should no longer count as part of their program because it only temporarily gets people off the streets. They want to move people into permanent housing. So I think an important job for your next representative is to make sure that transitional housing is included in HUD funding and making sure that that's protected. Especially because many of the homeless and even veterans who are going through transition, they need to have that period of time where they can see counseling, where they can do job training. So before they get back on their feet and move into permanent housing, we need to make sure that we do have that transitional housing for them. So those would be my priorities.
Who has 30 seconds? You.
You together have 30 seconds.
Oh. At the federal level, what role do you think the Fed should play in providing adequate housing for all of these areas? Since the budgets have been reduced tremendously over the last 20 years.
Yes. Well, I have to say, this is an area across all counties that cover District 20. This is one of the top issues that comes up every time, water and affordable housing. So clearly it's important, and clearly we're looking to our federal leadership to provide some solutions. But I have to say, the best solutions come at the local level. I serve on the Pacific Grove City Council. We were the first city in Monterey County to initiate the safe parking program for homeless to be able to stay in their cars. Obviously, it's not ideal, but what we found is that we could meet the needs of our community at the local level with city council action. So while funding can come from the federal government, I think we want to empower the municipalities to make the best decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I agree. I think we all agree that homeownership is a good thing. Problem is, in this area, there's no homes to own. And that's the issue. We do need significant type of development when it comes to building housing for our workers. Look, my wife and I lived up in Alameda County. She's a judge. Probably get in trouble for saying that, but people keep on telling me don't mention that she's a judge. But I got to make a point here. She's a judge. I'm a prosecutor. We could have easily stayed up in Alameda County. We could have lived up there, worked in Oakland, and probably moved through the tunnel, lived up in Lafayette, Moraga, someplace up there. But you know what? It wasn't home. We wanted to move back here. It was a pain in the rear end to move back here. And it shouldn't be like that for people who are from here, for people who want to contribute here, for people who want to serve here. We had to make sacrifices. I had to take a pay cut. But we did it because this was our home. And so when you look at what it takes to buy a house here, where the median price of a house in Santa Cruz County is $650,000, yet the median income is $75,000, you got to look at the definition, the federal definition of Section 8 housing, where it says that a third of your income goes to paying for your housing. I think that many of us would qualify under that definition. But that's where it has come to in Santa Cruz. And it shouldn't be like that. We don't want our workers driving 2 hours to come here. We want them not only to work here, we want them to live here. Because yes, we want to create that sense of community, that sense of belonging that I have, that I guarantee you all of you have. That's why you're here today. So with the solution to that, obviously there's no one solution, but you have to see through the emotions of the argument to the facts. As I stated, I'm a prosecutor. We look at the facts. What do we need? We need housing. That's a fact. You have to talk about what we're going to build, where we're going to build it. Workforce housing. We don't build out. Maybe we should consider building up. Building in transit communities where there are transit hubs. And you look at who we build that housing for. Maybe public servants. Maybe there are housing trusts in areas, housing for people who serve you. Firefighters, policemen, nurses, teachers, prosecutors, people who serve you. Because that's what it's about. It's about encouraging people to serve and not encouraging people to serve here in our home and not making it difficult. You know, a supervisor friend I was talking to the other day, and he told me how he was talking to somebody and he was proud that they were getting a park built in his district. And this person came over to him and said, I don't care about that park. I don't have any children. That's not what it should be about. It should be about people caring about this community. And you do that by bringing families in, bringing workers in, and providing them with a place to live. And there's ways to do that for a federal representative, such as making sure that we encourage affordable housing in this area. You look at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the rural developments, and you make sure that there are enough tax credits available for developers when it comes to affordable housing. Thank you.
Questions are getting harder to ask because you've covered so much territory.
I don't have the answer. We're good.
So the wage housing imbalance is just getting worse from 2 points of view. Number one, the wages themselves, the lower income ones are stagnant and the higher income ones keep going up, which creates a transportation balance in terms of imbalance, in terms of where people can live. So when you get to Washington, what's one of the first areas you would look for in terms of a political philosophy that might bring people to come in a new way, to make a new decision on housing?
Yeah, well, the questions are getting harder too. I would say that what it comes down to is you have to look. Let's first talk about an area in which we can come together and make sure that all sides are willing to be able to compromise on certain areas. Look, when it comes to housing, I mean, like what has been alluded to, is it's a local issue. Okay, well, I get that. We understand that. But I think when you talk about issues that myself and Casey have talked about, when it comes to basically building communities, I think that's something that resonates with everybody. And so I think the federal representative's job is to make sure that there is enough housing stock and it's affordable for the people in their districts. I think every representative in Washington, D.C. can agree on that.
That's good news. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Laura, where's Laura? Oh, good, thank you. We solved the distance problem with our question. Want to talk about education, please?
Sure, you bet. Look, I went to public schools. I'm proud that my daughters, because we moved back here, go to the same elementary school that I went to. I'm also proud that they're going to go to Carmel High School and beat PG High and take the shoe. But I'm also proud that I went to a community college because that saved me. Because in high school, I played athletics. I didn't focus on academics, I admit that. But it took me going to MPC, just like my two older brothers, who went on to Berkeley, I went on to UC Davis, to get us straight and allow us to develop our academics, our maturity, and also our financial foundation, in the sense that I was able to work full-time when I went to community college and pay my way through UC Davis. And so I'm proud of the public schools that I went to. We just need to ensure that our leaders in Washington, D.C. and in the state of California are also proud of their public school systems. But unfortunately, once again, there's been a divestment in our public education. But the feds need to ensure the proper focus, the proper investment in our education system. They need to ensure the higher standards, and they need to listen to the locals in regards to those standards. That's why No Child Left Behind was taken away, and now we have Every Student Should Succeed, which gives more authority in determining what schools succeed. We don't teach to the test, we teach to the student now. And so that's important that the federal representatives have their ear to the ground when it comes to that. Second of all, we need to continue Title I funding for low-income students to have the same opportunities in our public schools. We need to promote early education when it comes to preschool funding, and we need to show how important it is for our teachers to be able to come into communities like Santa Cruz, teach and live. And so we need to make sure, first of all, that they want to do it. We need to cut them a break. We need to make sure that they even have tuition free, or we make sure that if they're taking out loans to go to school to be teachers, we cut those loans and the interest rates on those loans. Second of all, we think about sort of a workforce housing for our teachers. We should give them a place to live in order to live in areas like Santa Cruz with such expensive housing. And I also think that we need to put back into our schools mental health observance. We need to realize that that is a topic that can affect not only adults, but children as well. Now, fortunately, once again, Santa Cruz has taken it upon themselves to deal with some of these issues. You have come up with your local solutions, including Second Harvest Food Bank, which provides over 1 million meals a year to over 7,000 students each year. You have to look at Future Ready Schools, where there were 2 teachers, Mr. Bergen and Mr. Baker, who were back in Washington, D.C., talking to the White House about what's going on here in our public schools and making sure that they're up to date and prepared for college. And we have to focus on lowering college tuition. Basically, like I said, in the past 30 years, college has gone up 300%. We're burdening, we're setting our college students up for failure in taking on that much debt. And also, we always have to make sure that our community colleges are available, not only to help the vocational workers, but to help the gen trained workers, and obviously help people like me, students like me, who needed that foundation in order to move on. I can tell you right now, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Monterey Peninsula College. Thank you.
So, welcome.
Thank
That's
you.
the first thing I want to say.
Thanks, Dr.
So, you mentioned No Child Left Behind. We also have Common Core. That's pretty new to our K-12 system. In your opinion, how can our K-12 system be best supported and be successful, especially in light of the growing English second language learners and in light of the growing need for more remediation?
Well, I think we saw what happened in December when they wiped out No Child Left Behind and they replaced it with Every Student Succeeds. And as I mentioned earlier, that's important, and I think that's a relief to a lot of people. Don't get me wrong, testing's still going to be there, but it's not going to be the standard that people use to judge whether a teacher succeeded, whether a school succeeded. And so I think that's important that that decision was made. That is actually huge. But I also think when it comes to English as a second language learners, Title I is important. Title I makes sure that those schools have those funds for low-income students, and those schools get to determine where that funding goes. And on top of that, we have to support President Obama when he talked about early education, providing billions. I think he provided $2 billion when it came to making sure that there was preschool funding there. I think when you start off at that level, and you make sure that the feds are fully aware of what's going on and have the goals of making sure that that's the type of funding they want, because they know how it can affect not only our children, but everybody's children. I think that's what it comes down to at the federal level.
All right. What do you think is the federal role in providing successful educational programs that actually support workforce development and economic vitality?
If you look at the community colleges in this district, Cabrillo, obviously one of them, MPC, Hartnell, you have Gatlin over in Gilroy as well. They do an important role in getting our students prepared. There's no doubt about that. But I think you also realize that they need to provide, and they do provide, vocational training for people who want to learn other skills. And yes, maybe not go on to a four-year college, but they want to be able to do the type of work in order to have a job, in order to live in this area. So I think it's important that funding continue to come into schools like those, which supports those types of programs, not just for your basic education, your AA that you're going to get there, but also to ensure that students who use the community colleges go there, get the proper training that they can, make sure that there's a diverse enough curriculum for those types of students so that they can then give back to this community with their jobs. Thank you. Thank you.
And Jimmy, we are agreed to do a 2-minute summary, and I know that you have to race off to be in court. Would you like to do a 2-minute summary, and then we'll stand Casey up this?
Sure. Like I said, thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate that. I think that, you know, in my meetings today, and in meeting all of you too today, you know, you hear a term that's often around here, and it's about locally grown. We have locally grown vegetables, we have locally grown businesses, but I think the focus needs to be on locally grown people. Now, I'm proud that I'm locally grown, as many of you are locally grown. And it takes that type of commitment to basically appreciate it and have that sense of belonging. As you heard throughout my comments, I'm from here. I'll always be here. That's why I came back here. That's why I serve here. As a prosecutor, that's why I served in the military. That's why I served on boards like the Veterans Transition Center, like the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council, like the UCSC Foundation, because I wanted to give back to this community in more than just in the courtroom. And that's why I want to be your federal representative. I have the support of all of your supervisors. I have the support of 6 out of the 7 city councilmen and women. I have the support of your mayor and your past mayor. I have the support because I am from here, because I am willing to come here. I am willing to listen to you. When Sam Farr announced his retirement, and I was making my phone calls to talk to fellow the supervisors, one of the supervisors from this district said, "Look, Jimmy, I shouldn't even be talking to you. There's a lot of potential politicians out there that have much better titles than you. But the fact is, I'm going to support you. And I'm going to support you because you've come here. You've been here for the last 6 years. You've shown up. You build bridges. And that's why I'm giving you my endorsement. And to me, ladies and gentlemen, if I am representative of your area, I will be here. I will listen to you. I will be your bridge to Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Education.
Please.
Thank you. Well, as a professor, education is very personal to me, and education impacts every aspect of our society. And yet we continue to have challenges within education. You know, in California, our education in California used to be top in the nation. Now California is ranked 41st. So the question for me is, how do we get California back on top, and how do we accomplish the 3 A's? Affordability, accessibility, and accountability in education. On the issue of accountability and funding, as Jimmy mentioned, there was new legislation passed just last month called the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that act did 4 things. First, it empowered states so that states could measure the performance of students. Second, it has built-in rewards for the most effective teachers. Third, it provides funding, federal funding for early childhood education, including pre-K. And then fourth, and probably most importantly, it provides federal funding to those districts that are serving low-income students. It essentially replaced the Elementary and Secondary School Act, which, by the way, had not been funded since 2007. But here's the rub with the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's not funded. And it won't be funded until 2017. So who you elect in this position will determine whether or not that bill is funded and to what level. Right now, the amount of money that's allocated in 2017 for Every Student Succeeds is $756 million. That might sound like a lot, but when you divide that among every school district in the nation, and we have almost 14,000 school districts, you end up with about $56,000 per district. Not per school district. So unfortunately, what we see is we see the Department of Education very enthusiastically putting out mandates, putting out standards and curriculum, but not enthusiastically putting out the money that we need to implement those standards and that curriculum successfully. The Department of Education budget is about $69 billion. 3/4 of that goes to student financial aid for college students. And I personally know how scary it can be to think you might have to drop out of college because you don't know how you're going to pay for the next quarter or for the next semester. So I think it's important that money from the federal government, from the Department of Education, goes to support those students in need through federal financial aid, through waivers for application fees, and for student loan forgiveness. But the key is to make sure that students know that those programs exist and that they are accessible to the students in need. I have taught both undergraduate and at the graduate level, both here in the United States and overseas, and I have seen firsthand how education changes lives. It changed my life. It opened doors of opportunity, and I've seen for other students how education is a gateway. It breaks them out of the cycle of struggle. It provides them with hope and possibilities that they may be able to create something different with their life. So we need to get this right. This is an area where we can't throw federal dollars and think that it's going to be okay. We have to have the right policies in place. And in my mind, the right policies start in investing in pre-K through 12 education and preparing those students for higher education. And if you read the Department of Education website and you go through some of our current educational policies, the goal is to prepare students for the next 4 years. But I'll tell you, that's not good enough. We need to prepare our students for the next 40 years. And the way to do that is to invest in our students early. Make sure that we have the best teachers and make sure that we're investing in technology and setting up our students for success. Thank you.
We are really fortunate to have a dynamic research institution right here in Santa Cruz. What do you think is the role of federal government in supporting research or research centers?
Yes. So I think there is a very important role in the federal government supporting research. And of course, it always depends on what kind of research, because that becomes controversial. And then that also depends on where the money comes from, right? So whether or not that money comes out of the Department of Education budget, I think is really the question. Should the federal government fund research? Absolutely. Where it comes from, I think, is another question. And because the Department of Education budget is already so tight, and as we see, not very much money actually gets funneled down to the local schools, I think it would be more appropriate for the research to come from other budgets. I'll give you an example. There's some medical research, actually, that is funded by the Department of Defense. And the medical research is testing on animals, which, by the way, I'm not a big fan of. My husband works for the Humane Society. But But it's important research, and it's funded by the Department of Defense, and that's the kind of thing that most people don't even realize is happening. It benefits our educational sector, it benefits our medical community, and of course, it benefits those working within defense.
So you know that continued education promotes higher living wage, right? What can the federal government do to assist in getting students to complete their high school degree and actually go on to college?
So, okay, I just made this case that education is really important. It pulls people out of a life that they might otherwise be stuck in. But I have to say, I'm also a believer that not everyone needs to go to college. I'm a big believer in job training and vocational training. My older sister did not go to college. She was just not a natural student. She didn't enjoy learning. She didn't want to go to college, and yet she's had a very successful career. And I think there are lots of people like that. So when we talk about associating college with a higher wage or with success, I think what we really need to focus on is not so much you need college to be successul, but you need appropriate job skills. And I think that can be done in high school. And by the way, I think if students were receiving vocational training in high school, it used to be in high schools, that would incentivize those kids to stay in school, because then they would be properly prepared not only to graduate, but to get a good job.
Okay, one more question. What do you think is one change or improvement that you see necessary for educational institutions to consider in meeting their respective missions in order to get future employees and citizens of tomorrow? What do educators need to improve?
Can you repeat that?
What is one change or improvement you see necessary for educational institutions to consider in order to meet their respective missions in educating our future citizens and our employees?
That's a good question. Yeah. That's why you got to ask the questions. Okay, so what is one thing educational institutions can do? Higher education?
Either one.
Okay, well, I'm thinking of higher education because I am a Republican in Santa Cruz. And I'm also an academic, right? And I'm also a vegetarian, and my husband works for the Humane Society, so I'm not your typical Republican. But I had an interesting experience in academia. I got my PhD from the University of Hawaii, which was lovely, by the way. But it's a very liberal institution, and I was studying political science. And I have to tell you, I was disappointed with the lack of diversity of perspective among professors. Then I went on to teach at the Hanoi University of International Studies, which is a completely different world, because in Hanoi, Vietnam, there is not academic freedom. There is no freedom of speech. So professors don't have freedom, nor do the students really have freedom to speak up. So that may not be a good example. Coming back to this area, I started teaching at the Naval Postgraduate School. And again, I was surprised, even at that institution, at the lack of diversity among our professors. I think if we want to properly prepare our students for success and for the world, we need to make sure they're adaptable, flexible, that they have open minds, and that they're getting different perspectives from their adult examples. Thank you.
I wouldn't have let you go on if I didn't think it was a really good answer. Well done.
Thank you. So I have 30 seconds for closing.
No, you got 2 minutes. Go.
Well, I'll just say briefly, thank you all for taking the time to be here today and for listening to us. I know listening to 2 political candidates may not always be that interesting, but I do appreciate the opportunity and your attention. And you know, as we talked about these 4 topics, obviously the key theme was we need federal funding, right? That's always going to be the theme. And as a representative, I will absolutely fight for this district for federal funding. But more importantly, we have to get the right policies in place, because without the right policies, we'll continue to throw money at these problems, and it will just be this vicious cycle of never-ending spending. So getting the right policies means making sure that they are good federal policies, but that they don't conflict with the unique values of this community. And this is a unique community that we want to respect and we want to hold in high regard. And that's the art of being a member of Congress, is to pass legislation that is the best legislation for the nation, but it is also the right fit for your district. And that's how I want to serve you. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey, and thanks to Jimmy, who had to be off the sentencing, and Salinas. Thanks to all of you. We'll look forward to seeing you for the 2017 annual meeting of the members, and hopefully many times before that. Travel safe. Thank you.